before the outbreak of the Ukraine war, that most Ukrainians just felt like, they heard all this talk about an impending war. You just had the sense it just seems unreal. It's just so far from the present reality that you can't believe it. And then it happened. And here we are. I guess there is this tendency to say, yeah, well, it can't really. That's just so crazy. But of course it could. I don't think there's anything inevitable about a world war, but it could. It's not at all difficult to imagine scenarios where this war could expand and spill over into other countries. We've come close to that, I think, already. There's a constant potential for that. And then we just get this constant war talk from European leaders. And the thing that in itself is disturbing. It's just like you keep on talking about war. You start to make it, you begin to make it real. It's just that I think you increase the likelihood for it. It's just that where it was something that could not be considered, that was just, was completely off the table. Now it's on the table. You've put it on the table and it made it an option. Again, we've talked about the constraints, the barriers to that, but let's not underestimate the capacity for human error, for human folly. Again, I wouldn't put any trust in the wisdom of these leaders. And we may find ourselves in a world war at some point. I think that's certainly possible. A European war, which could turn into a world war. And would they carry out a false flag? Certainly. I mean, especially as the situation on the ground, in the battlefields becomes increasingly grim for them, as we see, that's a trend. It's only going to get worse. There's going to be this increasing desperation. And there's going to be this realization that our only chance, our only way out of this is to get NATO in on our side. And how can we do that? We can attempt a false flag. I think we've seen some kind of feeble attempts at false flags already. There was that missile that landed in Poland. I think it was back in 2022 and killed a farmer and one other individual. And immediately there's some question. There are two stories. One that this was just a missile that went off course. But others argue that that's just not possible. It actually had to have been fired into Poland deliberately by the Ukrainians. It was an air defense missile. But immediately the Ukrainians seized on it and tried to get a NATO country to declare Article 5, to get Poland to do that. Now that NATO shut it down, I think they understood what was going on and they didn't let that happen. And then we had the drone attack on Poland too. And I think that was something similar, another false flag. So, we've seen them. There have been rumors about false flags directed against the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And we've seen actual many, many attacks on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. The idea seems to be that they want to create some kind of nuclear accident there and then blame it on the Russians. Have a cloud of radioactive material drifting towards Europe and say, look what the Russians have done. Essentially they're attacking you. Time for Article 5. So there's every reason to believe that I think that they're going to, first of all, that they have attempted false flags and that they're going to continue to, and they may succeed. They can be really quite clever. We've seen, with help probably from the British. That's
what I was going to say.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is it's going to be, I think, NATO members that are involved within a false flag on themselves.
Right.
Like, that's what's so crazy. It's because it seems like, especially the Brits, they really want this war. And I feel like it's pretty pathetic of them, and because they're so far away. And they're willing to, let's start this huge conflict in Eastern Europe. And, don't worry, they'll have to go through Poland and Romania. We'll sacrifice all of them before they come to the UK. It's like, you guys are way over here on this island. Like, why are you so invested in this conflict that's on the other side of Europe from you? It just doesn't make sense. Like, why do you care so much?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, but they do have that obsession. There's no question about it.
Is it
Of
just
course,
ego? It's just like, yeah, they wanted that Churchill,
yeah,
spirit. They
well,
just want
right.
to replicate that so much.
I guess it's just hard to let go of it. They were the world power for, over a century, and it's something that's hard to let
Yeah, a
go of.
century ago. It's
Yeah,
been
I
a long
know.
time. Nobody's
Exactly.
alive back from that day,
Yeah.
hardly anybody.
Yeah, but I guess just the ghost of the imperial past continues to haunt England. That's all I can say. I
Well,
don't,
that sucks because then it just seems like we are having to pay for this, the inertia from our history just continues. We can't escape it. It's like is it going to be here in America? We're going to have to continue living after empire dies. There's just going to be this empire mentality in the US for the next 100 years that, we still need to be number one somehow. And
oh, it's possible. There's no question about it. It's possible that could happen. Yeah, those old dreams, they don't, it's just a dream of the Roman Empire haunted Europe for many centuries afterwards. And it was finally abandoned, I guess, really with Westphalia and the fall of the Holy Roman Empire.
I just feel like I just feel like we're going for World War III, and I think they're going to get their way because they're just the people in charge don't give a damn about anything else. Let's tank our economies. We don't care about our people, whatever. Just get rid of welfare programs. We gotta have this war. And if they just stick on it and just never change their position, they eventually seem to get what they want.
Yeah, well, there's a real risk. Again, it's not, they don't have the popular support now. It's not like they're responding to any sort of public pressure, quite the reverse. But they do have this obsession, and we can see it with the leading countries of Western Europe. We're talking about France, Germany, and the UK. Each one of those leaders is just obsessed with Ukraine to the detriment of their respective countries. Now, maybe in the end they'll all fail ignominiously. And they'll be replaced by people who are more reasonable. There's reason to hope for that. But you're right. These people are just obsessed with it. They do have a good amount of power, and they can make things happen. It's just like the public is not with them, but perhaps a false flag can bring the public, into line. This has happened in the past. It's happened in the U.S. It's false flags are often very effective. Let's be honest.
Right. And if you're unpopular, and then if a war breaks out, then then everything else is forgotten, and now it's all about the war. And
yeah,
and,
well, you see, yeah. I was just going to say that logic applies within Ukraine too. I was just reading. I've been reading a lot on the history of Ukraine leading up to the conflict, and prior to the outbreak of the war in 2022. The launch of the SMO, Zelensky was very unpopular. Which is, he was actually following the trajectory that previous presidents, I think Poroshenko, Yats, the one that was selected by Victoria Nuland, he got down to 2% or something, and Poroshenko wasn't much better. But then you found Zelensky was actually just, his popularity ratings or approval ratings were following the same trajectory. They were dropping. He was way down and underwater. And the war was actually to his benefit. That's what saved him. That's what made him, this great Churchillian figure. And that could be true with these other people. Again, their approval ratings are I think in every case under 20% and close to 10%. I think the last one I saw from Macron was 11%. But a war, if it's, especially if it's, if it started, or if it's ushered in by some sort of false flag that attributes some sort of barbarism to the Russians, it can get everybody's blood boiling, and they all of a sudden their president, this Macron or Starmer or Merz, now they're great. They represent the nation. We stand behind them. They're our leaders, and we want to march forward and meet the Russian horde. And we're a long way from that, but you see that, maybe that's just it's not going to work with today's Europe. I hope that's true. But again, losing politicians often have a way of, often look to war as a way out of their political difficulties.
Are we getting close to the point where that decision is going to be made on direct NATO intervention? Are we getting to that point? Because we've talked about it before, and you said you don't think it'll actually happen. There's no popular support. I'd like to think that's true, but at the same time, I haven't seen any ability for the West to de-escalate. They only have like the Alexes say, there's no reverse gear when it comes to the neocons, when it comes to the elite.
Yeah.
And you have a president that was elected repeatedly saying, I'll have this war done in 24 hours. I just want the killing to stop. To thunderous applause, people that whenever he says this is what he was elected. Why he was elected was to end wars.
Yeah,
one of the main reasons. One of the main reasons. I mean, it resonated with a lot of people. We just didn't want it. And now what we have is we have Joe Biden 2.0, and maybe it's worse now because he's just so erratic. And so it's like, it's not possible. If you had somebody that campaigned saying that he's going to end this war, and then we're in the situation we're in now, it's like, then we just can't end it. And then that means it just has to keep on going. And we're getting to the point where, Pokrovska's fallen, Kupiansk is surrounded, the lights are out throughout Ukraine. They're on the brink. They're out of men. Forced conscription videos. I just saw on the news today that there was a man that was is it the TASS? Those are the ones that are trying to, the forced conscription guys. They're going out there, and they try to conscript some guy, and he shot two of the conscriptors. So it's like, you can see it's at a boiling point. They're running out of men, running out of money. We've talked about this, running out of time.
Right. Desertion rates are very, very high, and they're getting higher every month. Right.
Right. So we're getting to, we don't say collapse. I think Mark Sablota says it's a crumbling, but a crumbling, an incipient collapse is what you said. So that means we're getting to this point, right, that we're going to have to find out whether or not this will happen. And I think it might happen.
Yeah, it might. Again, I know it just might. Yeah, the thing is, right, they are not, I think as I said yesterday, it's clear that Putin actually has tried to provide the off-ramps and has made compromises that were politically difficult for him. And we even accepted the plan that Trump gave to
Putin at Alaska, right? I mean, there was a plan.
Right, we offered the plan. It was right, and he accepted it. That's right. Anyway, that's exactly what Lavrov says. He doesn't give us details of the plan, but I think we can piece it together from these leaks what it was, and it did involve, a significant compromise. Again, a ceasefire in Zaporozhye in Kherson. That was a significant compromise for the Russians. And again, it would be politically unpopular. Again, there are a lot of people within the Russian government. Now, I think the idea was that this is temporary. Eventually, you get it all, but there's really no guarantee of that. You accept a ceasefire, it would be very, very hard for the Russians later to get those territories. I think that's obvious. So anyway, there are these opportunities, and there's just a refusal. Opportunities, of course, prior to the war to avoid the war altogether. The Russians came with their plans and offers to negotiate, and we wouldn't. So, we're just still on this no negotiation. It's just like the only solution is total victory on our side. And that's just a formula for disaster. And again, it's a formula actually for humiliating defeat for the NATO side. And so it's either going to be, I think it's going to be humiliating defeat for the NATO side one way or the other. And it's just a question of, is it going to end just within Ukraine, with a humiliating defeat for NATO? Or is it going to end, will the end actually take place after NATO intervenes? And then we have Russia actually will defeat NATO on the battlefields, or, the battlefield is actually going to expand and they're going to strike military facilities throughout Europe. There's going to be missiles flying into Germany and France and the UK, that is not going to be safe in those missiles. That's the horror, and because that does take us up right to the brink of nuclear war. And, God forbid that happens, but there's a chance, if you refuse to negotiate, and it's clear that they are, they're just insisting, they're delivering ultimatums, and it's basically they haven't budged from their original position, essentially that Well, I guess you have to say they budged a bit. Before they didn't even, like the Ukrainians didn't even talk about a ceasefire. Now that they see they're losing, they want a ceasefire, but that's all. I think that the hope is that, it would give them time to regroup and rebuild and rearm and start it again. But, again, it's you could say that Europe is its own worst enemy in this case. It won't end well for them no matter what. It would end better now. It would be a humiliation, but the humiliation is going to be greater down the road. So they should do something now, of course, but they won't. They show no willingness, no awareness. You get those kind of lone voices of reason from people like Orban or, Vucic, who you quoted earlier. Of course, he's not part of the EU, but he's part of Europe. But they're not being heard. These are people are just immediately condemned, actually. It's not like, okay, yeah, let's consider this. Let's debate this. No, this is outside debate. It's just like, we have to continue the course. Anything else is capitulation. They painted it all in those terms. And so I just don't see any exit from the course that we're on.
I just feel like if there was a direct war between NATO and Russia, that it would go nuclear very quickly, because we all know where this goes, right? It's game theory. We've never had a war between two nuclear powers, like this. And it's just like, if you're doing the game theory, it's just like, okay, well, who wins? You got to strike first, right? Like, where is this going to go, Do you think that that's true, that it could go nuclear very fast if this happens?
It could. Of course, we've never been there, and we've gamed it, but that's still not reality. We've never been there, But it's the sort of thing where, if it only has to happen once, for.
It's so crazy to even talk about it, but the reason I talk about it and bring it up is just because I just don't see the ability for the West to back down, to admit defeat. I hope that we can just say that this Ukraine war is over, but it just doesn't feel possible now. I've lost hope. I was hopeful at the beginning of the year, and now it's all gone.
Yeah. No, I don't see it ending. And the big question is, will it spread? Will it become a direct war? And not just a proxy war, but a direct war between NATO and Russia? And if it does,
what do we have to hope for?
I just wanted to add one thing is that,
sorry,
it's just that the Russians, I think, if they occasionally remind everybody, hey, there's in the background of all this is the potential for nuclear war. And we do have the means to destroy, don't think that you'll be safe if it goes there. And, that's one reason for unveiling the Burevestnik and the Poseidon and the Oreshnik and these other new weapons.
Well, look at Trump's response. He's like, I'm going to move my nuclear subs off of your, right outside of Moscow.
And we're going to renew nuclear testing. Right. Yeah, exactly. This is not, things are different. And during the Cold War, those threats led to negotiations. There was an understanding that, we could actually destroy the world. And we may not like the Soviets, but they do have the power to destroy us. So we need to talk to them and we need to work something out. And we did, but you just don't see the same consciousness now. I mean, I was just thinking yesterday is that we have this very strange situation where the Westerners are the Western media, Western leadership in general is always describing Putin as a madman, which is just not true. It's just he's anything but a madman. But he's described that way. He's a mad dictator. You often get these descriptions. And then when he points out, hey, we have these nuclear weapons, there should be real fear. And say, a madman has nuclear weapons. We need to do something. We need to work something out. We don't like him. We hate him, but we need to work something out to make us safer. Reach some sort of agreement. We could at the very least extend the START treaty, right? Which he's offered to do. At the very least, that's the last control that we have that's going to keep things. We could also restart the Open Skies Treaty, which allowed both sides to inspect, the other side's capabilities. That's something we pulled out of too. but we could start again. The Russians have made it clear that they're willing to restart those. It just seems like, okay, you think he's a madman. He's a mad dictator. You know that he has these weapons. Why don't you go talk to him? You may hate him, but it's just like, there's just this, the people that lead our countries are not like the people that led our countries during the Cold War. Those were sane men. They were actually statesmen, and they reached some agreements that really pulled us back from the brink. We don't have those people here, in charge anymore. And that's the worrying thing. Again, they maybe deep down, they understand the risk. We've seen evidence of that. Again, I spoke about the former NATO General Secretary saying that he was asked by Zelensky to impose a no-fly zone, and he explained to Zelensky, we can't do that. If we do that, that's World War III. Yeah. But the thing we've also seen, just kind of this steady escalation, where we're doing things that we would have thought of unthinkable, even from our own perspective, even according to the words of our own leaders just a couple of years ago. We're going right up to the point of talking about delivering tomahawks, for example. Or at least, sending troops, they call them reassurance troops, into Ukraine. This is really crazy talk, which even at the beginning of the war was not considered. We've gone far towards that. So I still believe, maybe because I just feel like I have to believe, the alternative is so horrifying. I still believe that we'll stop when we get to the precipice, but we keep on approaching it. And that is very worrying.
It's surprising me that nobody is talking about the potential danger of World War III and a nuclear war. At least our elites aren't. And for the most part, most people in the West, I don't think, are that conscious of it because it just seems like it's too implausible. But we've just talked about it. It's just the trajectory things are going. It's not too many logic steps you have to take to see where this could potentially go. And so it's just amazing that nobody's talking about it. But you have people talking about, should we, shoot Tomahawk missiles at Russia? Like, well, there's consequences to that, right? Well, what happens when you do that? Do we not think beyond that? Or let's send in 80,000 troops to Ukraine. Like, there's consequences to that too. What are you saying? What happens when that happens? And then it's like, oh, nuclear war is what happens? Let's defeat Russia. What does that mean, defeating Russia? Nuclear war? Can we not understand? You don't have to go too far. But the fact that nobody is talking about this is really worrying.
It is.
Nuclear drills during the Cold War, right? I mean, people hide under their desk like it's going to do something, but at least people were conscious of it.
Right. Yeah, I know. It is very worrying. It's very strange, but the risk of nuclear war has become a Russian talking point, according to the Western media. And so you can't bring it up. When you bring it up and you say, hey, let's stop. This is just too dangerous. We don't like what Russia did. We don't like the Russians. We don't like Putin, but we have to talk and we have to pull back from the brink here. That's apparently a Russian talking point because that's what the Russians want. But just stop and think. You say, okay, the Russians want it, but maybe we should want it too. Okay. Again, it's not like it's just Russia that's going to be vaporized. It's going to be the whole Western world. There's the potential for that. And you ought to be thinking about it. It just seems like, again, we've entered into this, I guess, a postmodern world, almost a post-truth world where everything is about the narrative. And the Russians have their narrative, we have our narrative. And reality seems to just sort of disappear. It becomes just one of the less important factors in all this. It's all about the narrative. And if you are actually adopting some so-called Russian talking points, you're undermining our narrative and you need to go away and shut up. That's where we are. We got to get out of that. We got to get out of that frame of mind.
Yeah, I think another problem is that this is just happening against the backdrop of so much other crazy stuff that's happening here. So people don't have the mental bandwidth to absorb all of it, to think about it, because, and I do too, I just kind of, just when we started this conversation, I didn't know where it was going to go. And then I'm just like, oh my God, nuclear war, like this is what happened, because I've been so busy with the MAGA civil war, what's happening, with the Israeli lobby and this mass noticing and awakening that's happening in this country. And I'm just thinking how this is going to destroy the country, that this is tearing the country apart. And on the backdrop of the Epstein stuff as well, the fact that maybe a good portion of our government are blackmailed pedophiles and they're controlling. You had the president of Colombia. I don't know if you saw him talking about it, just openly saying like, yeah, America is run by pedophiles. Like it's like it's mainstream amongst other countries now. It's just so crazy. And then you have it on the backdrop of what's happening with the genocide in Gaza still that's ongoing, that we had this live stream to us in 4K and we're asked to pay for it. And then like, this is obviously a very important thing. And then we just kind of forget, oh yeah, we might have nuclear war because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. There's just so much madness going on in the world, which makes me feel like when there is so much madness, when people are focusing on Epstein, are focusing on the Charlie Kirk assassination, are talking about the undue influence of the Israeli lobby in the United States and how they own all of our congressmen, then that also makes me feel like, well, the way to solve this problem, because we talked about it before, that the Zionist position is indefensible. We can't defend it. Everybody's making us want to have this national debate over Zionism. We can't do it because we can't win the argument. Boom, boom, let's start wars. We got to worry about this now because you can't, and we got to make sure that we win this giant war. Forget about everything else. Like, there's so much going on. And there's so many people that are so upset, so much unease and uncertainty, that I feel like the only way out for these people that are in power is war. And there's so many options. We have powder kegs that are already lit, they just have to fan the flames a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think there's no question about it. It's just that, there is so much madness in the world, so much conflict, so many certainties have been challenged or just shaken, that what seemed impossible has become impossible, and that's part of it. Like war seems a possibility where it for the longest time, for most of my life, actual war between Russia and the U.S. just was so far beyond the pale. It was understood to be so catastrophic. That we all understood that it would be wrong to even approach the edge of that precipice. So we all stood back on both sides, right? But now we've lost that. I think it's not just a question of the narrative, as I was pointing out, that we've really lost our grip on reality. I think that's a big part of the problem. But part of it is what you're saying. It's just that there's so much going on. The ground is shifting under our feet that we've lost our focus. And, it's hard to know where the catastrophe is going to come from. That's
exactly. Yeah.